There are moments in life when you lose everything that matters, and the world goes quiet in a way that's almost unbearable. Joel Kirby knew that silence well. At 50, after his divorce took his marriage, his home, and his relationship with his daughter, he found himself alone in a cabin on the edge of Montana's wilderness. He wasn't looking for answers or redemption, just a place to disappear. Then, an eagle started showing up. Every morning, the same bird, watching him from the trees. Joel thought nothing of it until the day it flew ahead and stopped, waiting. Something made him follow. What he discovered hidden in those mountains wasn't just remarkable, it was impossible. But why would a wild creature lead a broken man to something the world had forgotten? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe tomorrow. I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin smelled of pine and old coffee, a scent Joel Kirby had grown accustomed to over the past 8 months. It sat at the end of a gravel road that barely deserved the name, 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by lodgepole pines and the kind of silence that either heals you or breaks you further. Joel hadn't yet decided which it would be for him. He stood at the kitchen window, watching dawn paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. The view was stunning, the kind that should stir something in a man's chest. But Joel felt only the familiar numbness that had become his constant companion since the divorce papers were signed last February. His hands wrapped around a chipped mug, the coffee inside gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't noticed. 50 years old, and his life had come down to this. A rented cabin, a pickup truck with 140,000 miles on it, and a cell phone he kept charged out of habit rather than expectation. Nobody called anymore. His ex-wife Claudia had made sure their friends understood whose side to take, and his daughter Iris, 16 now, nearly grown, had chosen silence over choosing at all. The construction business he'd built over 25 years had been divided, sold, distributed according to lawyers and judges who'd never swung a hammer or understood what it meant to build something with your own hands. Claudia got the house in Billings, the one he'd designed himself, with the kitchen he'd remodeled 3 times until she was satisfied. She got the newer car, the retirement accounts, and somehow, without either of them meaning for it to happen, she got their daughter too. Joel told himself it was temporary. Iris was angry, confused, caught between her parents' wreckage. She'd come around eventually. He'd believed that in March and April, and through the long summer months when he'd sent texts that went unanswered and left voicemails that were never returned. Now, as October's chills settled into the mountains, he'd stopped believing much of anything. The cabin had been Hugh Caldwell's suggestion. Hugh was 73, a former park ranger who'd spent 40 years in these mountains before his knees gave out and forced him into something resembling retirement. He lived in a slightly larger cabin a mile down the road and had a way of appearing at Joel's door with fresh-caught trout or a bottle of decent whiskey, never staying long, never asking the questions that Joel couldn't answer. "You look like a man who needs some quiet," Hugh had said back in March, handing Joel the keys. "Place belongs to my nephew, but he's working in Alaska for the year. Rent's cheap, and the only neighbors are the ones with 4 legs. Joel had taken it, grateful for somewhere to land that didn't carry the weight of his old life. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, a wood stove, a porch that sagged slightly on the left side, but it was his, at least for now. He'd thought the isolation would help. Instead, it had given him too much time to think, too much space for regret to echo. His daily routine had calcified into something rigid and joyless. Wake before dawn, coffee, stare at the mountains, chop wood he didn't really need, make meals he barely tasted, read books whose plots he forgot by the next morning. Sleep came in fractured pieces, and dreams, when they came, brought Iris as she used to be gap-toothed and 7 years old, holding his hand on a trail, asking questions about every bird and flower they passed. He'd been a good father once, before the business grew and demanded more hours. Before the marriage soured and home became a place of careful distances and measured words. before he'd let exhaustion and resentment turn him into someone who was present in body but absent in all the ways that mattered. The eagle had first appeared in late September, about 3 weeks ago. Joel had been sitting on the porch, pretending to read, when movement caught his eye. The bird was perched in a dead pine about 30 yards out, massive and still, its white head brilliant against the dark bark. Golden eagles weren't uncommon in these mountains, but this one's behavior was unusual. It didn't hunt or scan the ground. It watched Joel. He dismissed it as coincidence. Birds perched in trees, that's what they did. But the next morning, it was back, same tree, same focused attention. And the morning after that, by the end of the first week, Joel had started talking to it, feeling foolish even as the words left his mouth. "You waiting for something?" he'd asked one morning, his voice rough from disuse. The eagle had tilted its head, and for a moment Joel could have sworn it understood. Hugh had noticed the bird during one of his visits. He'd stood on the porch, coffee in hand, studying it with the careful attention of someone who'd spent a lifetime observing wildlife. "That's a fine bird," Hugh had said finally. "Seen a lot of eagles in my years, but there's something about that one." "It won't leave me alone," Joel had replied, trying to make it sound like a complaint. Hugh had smiled, a knowing expression that made Joel uncomfortable. "Maybe it's got its reasons. Old stories say eagles are messengers sometimes, guides for folks who've lost their way. I'm not lost. I'm just—" Joel had stopped, unable to finish the sentence honestly. "Just hiding," Hugh had said gently. "And that's fine for a spell, but hiding's got a shelf life, Joel. Eventually, you've got to decide whether you're healing or just dying slower." The words had stung because they were true. Joel had been dying slower, letting days blur into weeks, letting the weight of his failures press him further into the earth. The divorce wasn't his fault alone, he knew that intellectually, but guilt didn't care about fairness. He'd failed his marriage, failed his daughter. Let his business consume him until there was nothing left for the people who needed him most. Now here he stood, 50 years old with half a life behind him and nothing but empty space ahead. The eagle watched from its tree, patient as stone, and Joel felt the strange pull of its presence. It was waiting for something. He just didn't know what. Outside, the morning light strengthened, turning the frost on the grass into diamonds. Joel poured his cold coffee down the sink and pulled on his jacket. The woodpile needed restocking, and physical labor was the only thing that quieted his mind anymore. He stepped onto the porch, and the eagle shifted on its branch, tracking his movement. "Still here," Joel muttered. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" The bird remained motionless, and Joel felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months, curiosity. What did it want? Why this tree, this cabin, this broken man who had nothing to offer? He walked to the woodpile, axe in hand, and began to work. The rhythm of splitting wood was meditation, the bite of the blade into pine satisfying in its simplicity. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold air, and his shoulders burned pleasantly. For a few moments, the noise in his head quieted. When he looked up again, the eagle had moved. It was closer now, perched on a boulder just beyond the cleared space around the cabin. Its golden eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made Joel's breath catch. This wasn't normal bird behavior. Every instinct honed by years in the outdoors told him something was different here, something he didn't understand. The bird opened its beak, released a sharp cry that echoed across the mountainside, then launched itself into the air. Joel watched it circle once, twice, then fly toward the tree line to the north. It landed on a branch at the forest's edge, turned to look back at him, and waited. Joel's heart hammered in his chest. It was waiting for him. Impossible, irrational, but undeniably true. The eagle wanted him to follow. He stood there, axe hanging loose in his hand, caught between skepticism and something deeper, an instinct that whispered this moment mattered. The bird cried out again, and Joel made a decision. He set down the axe and walked toward the cabin. Inside, he pulled on his hiking boots and grabbed his pack, moving on autopilot. He added a water bottle, his knife, a flashlight, the field guide Hugh had lent him months ago. His hands shook slightly as he zipped the pack closed. This was ridiculous. He was following a bird into the wilderness like some character from a children's story. But when he stepped back outside, the eagle was still there, still waiting, and Joel knew he was going to follow it. Something about this felt inevitable, like a current he'd been resisting had finally grown too strong to fight. He locked the cabin door and started walking toward the tree line. The eagle watched him approach, then took flight again, moving deeper into the forest. Joel followed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, his heart beating with something that might have been anticipation or might have been fear. He didn't know where the bird was leading him, didn't know what he'd find at the end of this strange journey. But for the first time in 8 months, Joel Kirby felt something other than numb resignation. He felt awake. Joel woke the next morning to find the eagle perched on his porch railing, close enough that he could see the individual feathers rippling in the breeze. He'd never been this near to it before. The bird was enormous, easily 3 feet tall, its hooked beak sharp and purposeful, but there was nothing threatening in its stance. It simply waited, as though it had an appointment, and Joel was running late. He dressed quickly, pulling on thermal layers and his worn hiking boots. The autumn air had a bite to it now, mornings dipping below freezing. He made coffee, drank it standing at the window, while the eagle watched him through the glass. When he stepped outside, the bird dropped something at his feet, a small pine branch, green and fresh, then launched itself toward the tree line. Joel picked up the branch, turning it in his hands. The gesture felt deliberate, meaningful, an offering or an invitation. He looked toward the forest where the eagle had disappeared, then back at his cabin. Every practical instinct told him this was foolish, but something deeper, something he'd thought the divorce had killed, urged him forward. He walked the mile to Hugh's cabin and found the old ranger already up, feeding chickens in his yard. Hugh took one look at Joel's face and nodded as if he'd been expecting this. "The bird?" Hugh asked. "It wants me to follow it." Hugh disappeared inside and returned with a day pack, already loaded with supplies. "Figured you might need this. Got water, first aid, some energy bars, trail mix." He paused, then pulled an old field guide from his jacket pocket. "And this belonged to a botanist who worked these mountains back in the 70s. Man named Ansel Vaughan. Brilliant fellow, but he died before his work got recognized." Joel took the guide, its cover worn soft with age. As he flipped through it, a folded paper slipped out, a hand-drawn map, water-stained and faded. It showed areas of the forest he didn't recognize, with elevations marked and a small cave circled in red ink. Strange symbols were sketched beside it. "Where is this?" Joel asked. Hugh shook his head. "Never seen that map before, but I knew Vaughan. He explored parts of these mountains nobody else bothered with. If he marked something, it meant something." Joel thanked him and headed back. The eagle was waiting at the tree line, and when Joel approached, it took flight, moving purposefully through the forest. Joel followed, pack heavy on his shoulders, the map folded in his pocket. The trek was harder than he'd anticipated. The eagle led him along no established trail, through dense undergrowth and over rocky terrain that demanded full attention. Several times he lost sight of the bird and had to stop, scanning the canopy until he spotted it, perched ahead, always waiting. The pattern continued for over an hour. Fly, wait, fly again. His legs burned. His breath came hard in the thin mountain air. Sweat soaked through his thermal layer despite the cold. But he pressed on, driven by curiosity and something else, a sense that turning back would mean more than abandoning a hike. It would mean surrendering to the numbness again, returning to the half-life he'd been living. The terrain grew steeper, more rugged, areas he'd never explored, even in his months of wandering these mountains. The eagle navigated with certainty, taking him higher, deeper into wilderness that felt untouched by human presence. Joel's calves screamed with effort. His water was half gone. Doubt crept in with each difficult step. What am I doing? Following a bird like some delusional hermit? Claudia would say this proved her point, that he'd lost himself completely, that the isolation had broken something in him. Maybe she'd be right. But he kept walking. 2 hours in, they reached a ridgeline Joel had never seen. The view opened up mountains layered to the horizon, valleys thick with pine, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The eagle circled above him once, then dove toward a rocky outcropping below, disappearing behind a cluster of boulders and twisted juniper. Joel scrambled down, using roots and rocks for handholds. The outcropping formed a small cliff face, and there, hidden behind dense brush and fallen timber, was an opening, a cave mouth, narrow and dark, partially obscured by decades of growth. The eagle sat at the entrance, utterly still. Joel approached slowly, his heart hammering. He pulled out his flashlight, clicked it on, and peered inside. The beam revealed worked stone steps carved into the rock, leading down. This wasn't a natural cave. Someone had modified it, expanded it, made it into something. He looked back at the eagle. The bird met his gaze, then turned and flew away, vanishing into the forest canopy. Joel stood at the threshold, flashlight in hand, every nerve alive with anticipation and fear. He descended the carved steps, counting 12 before the passage leveled out. His light swept across the space, and his breath caught. It was a room, a workspace. Carved into the mountain itself, expanded from some natural cavity into something functional. There were tables made from rough-hewn timber, shelves built into the rock walls, and equipment, old scientific equipment covered in dust but still intact. Glass beakers, scales, specimen jars, a camping stove, kerosene lanterns, filing boxes stacked against one wall. Joel moved deeper, his light dancing across forgotten things. Everything was layered in dust, untouched for years, maybe decades, but it had been carefully organized once, methodically arranged by someone who'd worked here with purpose. On the main table sat journals, 3 of them, leather-bound and thick, stacked beside a wooden box containing glass vials. Joel picked up the top journal with trembling hands and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was precise, scientific. Research Journal Dr. Ansel Vaughan, June 1971. Joel's pulse quickened. This was the botanist Hugh had mentioned. He flipped through pages filled with detailed sketches of plants, chemical formulas, observation notes. One sketch caught his eye, a plant with distinctive silver-veined leaves, unlike anything he'd seen in these mountains. He read the notation beside it, Salvia mortemi, preliminary identification. Subject displays remarkable regenerative properties in controlled tests, possible applications in cellular repair. Further study required. The wooden box held preserved specimens in sealed glass tubes. Joel lifted one carefully. Inside was a dried plant sample, its silver-veined leaves still visible after all these years, the same plant from the journal sketches. His mind raced. This was real scientific work, hidden away in a mountain cave. But why? Why would someone abandon research like this, leave it to gather dust in darkness? Joel spent the next hour exploring the cave, documenting what he found. More journals, more specimens, detailed maps of the surrounding area with locations marked. Vaughan had been searching for something specific, cataloguing where he'd found certain plants, noting soil conditions and elevation. One journal entry, dated September 1974, made Joel pause. They're coming. I've hidden what matters most. If this work is ever to continue, it must be by someone who understands what's at stake. The plant is worth more than money. It's worth protecting. The entry ended there, no explanation of who they were or what Vaughan had hidden. Joel photographed pages with his phone, packed several journals and specimen cases into his daypack. The weight felt significant, both physically and otherwise. He was carrying out something important, something that had waited in darkness for decades. As he climbed back toward daylight, questions multiplied. Who was Vaughan really? What had he discovered? And why had the eagle, the same eagle, if Hugh's impossible observation was true, led Joel here now? He emerged into afternoon light, blinking against the brightness. The eagle was nowhere to be seen. Joel stood at the cave entrance, looking out at the wilderness that had kept this secret, and felt the first real purpose he'd known in months. Whatever this was, it mattered. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, it had been waiting for him. Joel spread the journals across his kitchen table, the lamplight casting long shadows across Vaughan's careful handwriting. Outside, full darkness had settled over the mountains, and the cabin felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as though the walls were leaning in to witness what he'd discovered. He'd made coffee, strong and black, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. His hands still trembled slightly as he turned the brittle pages, careful not to damage what had survived decades in that hidden cave. The first journal began in June 1971, Vaughan's observations methodical and precise. Day 1. Established base camp at elevation 7,200 feet. Purpose: catalogue medicinal plants used by indigenous populations historically documented in this region. Initial surveys promising. The entries progressed through that summer and into fall, Vaughan's excitement building as he discovered various specimens. Then, in late August, the tone shifted dramatically. The 28th of August, 1971, found something extraordinary today. Growing in a sheltered ravine, previously unmapped, a plant I cannot identify from any existing literature. Leaves display unusual silver vevination. Preliminary field tests suggest properties unlike anything in current botanical record. Have taken samples for analysis. This could be significant. Joel read faster, pulled forward by Vaughan's growing obsession. The botanist had named the plant Salvia mortemi, death's sage, for reasons that became clear in subsequent entries. The plant seemed to possess remarkable healing properties. Vaughan's tests, crude by modern standards but meticulously documented, showed accelerated cell regeneration in plant tissues exposed to extracts. Later experiments on his own minor cuts and scrapes showed similar results. The 15th of September 1971, the implications are staggering. If these properties hold true in controlled studies, we may be looking at applications in wound healing, possibly tissue regeneration, perhaps even slowing cellular aging. I must proceed carefully. The scientific community will demand rigorous proof. But as Joel read deeper into the journals, following Vaughan's work through 1972 and into 1973, a darker thread emerged. The botanist had presented preliminary findings to colleagues. Instead of support, he'd encountered skepticism bordering on mockery. His requests for funding were denied. Universities dismissed his work as pseudoscience. March 1973. They call me a charlatan, a fraud chasing folklore and fairy tales. But I've seen what this plant can do. I've documented it. Their closed minds cannot erase truth. Vaughan had continued working alone, self-funding his research, growing increasingly isolated. The cave had become his laboratory, hidden from peers who'd rejected him. Joel felt an uncomfortable kinship with the long-dead botanist. Another man whose life's work had been dismissed, who'd retreated into isolation rather than face continued failure. The second journal grew more personal. Vaughan wrote about his daughter, Catherine, and his wife, Margaret. His obsession with the plant had cost him his marriage. Margaret had left, taken Catherine with her. Vaughan's entries became tinged with regret, even as he doubled down on his research. June 1973. Margaret won't return my calls. Catherine's birthday was yesterday, she's 11 now. I sent a gift, but don't know if she received it. They think I've chosen this work over them. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps I'm as foolish as they say. But this discovery, it matters. It has to matter. Joel set down the journal, his throat tight. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkness, seeing his own reflection ghosted in the glass. A man who'd lost his family to work, to obsession with things that ultimately didn't matter as much as the people he'd pushed away. Iris was 16 now, not so different from Vaughan's Catherine, and Joel had let her slip away just as completely. He returned to the table, opened the third journal. This one covered 1974, Vaughan's final year in these mountains, according to Hugh's knowledge. The entries were sporadic, often rambling, marked by increasing paranoia. January 1974. Someone has been asking questions in town. A man in an expensive suit, claiming to represent a pharmaceutical company. He knows about my work. How? I've been so careful. February 1974. They've made an offer. More money than I've ever seen. They want exclusive rights to the plant, to my research. Want to commercialize it, mass-produce derivatives. I should be thrilled. This is validation. Proof I wasn't chasing phantoms. But something feels wrong. They're too eager, too aggressive. March 1974. I refused their offer. They were not pleased. The man, he made it clear this wasn't really a negotiation. They'll get what they want, with or without my cooperation. They've threatened to claim my research was conducted on public lands, therefore public domain. They have lawyers, resources I can't match. Joel's stomach tightened. He flipped ahead, scanning entries. April 1974. I understand now what they intend. They don't want to preserve this plant or study it properly. They want to harvest it, extract what's valuable, scale up production without regard for the ecosystem. The plant grows in very specific conditions, limited habitat, delicate balance. Industrial harvesting would destroy it, possibly drive it to extinction. Everything I've worked for would be reduced to profit margins and patent applications. The implications hit Joel hard. This wasn't just forgotten research, it was deliberately hidden research. Vaughan had chosen obscurity over exploitation. The final entries were brief, almost cryptic. May 1974. I've made my decision. Some discoveries are too important to be owned. I'm taking steps to ensure the plant's protection. They won't find what they're looking for. Let history judge whether I'm right. The journal ended there, pages after it blank. Joel sat back, processing what he'd read. Vaughan had hidden his work to protect it, had taken his knowledge to the grave rather than see it exploited. It was noble and tragic in equal measure, a man who'd sacrificed everything, including recognition, for principles. Dawn light was seeping through the windows when Hugh knocked on the door. Joel let him in, and the old ranger took one look at the journals spread across the table and nodded knowingly. Found something, didn't you? Joel told him everything, talking through Vaughan's discoveries, his rejection by the scientific community, the pharmaceutical company's threats, the botanist's final decision to hide his work. Hugh listened carefully, occasionally picking up a journal to examine the sketches and notes. I remember when Vaughan disappeared, Hugh said finally. Summer of 74. We assumed he died in a hiking accident, though we never found a body. Search went on for weeks. His family claimed his remaining possessions, but there wasn't much. He'd lived pretty sparse by then. He paused, studying a sketch of the silver-veined plant. Nobody ever mentioned what he'd been working on. We just thought he was a botanist, doing general surveys. He was protecting something, Joel said. Something valuable enough that people would destroy the habitat to get it. Hugh set down the journal and met Joel's eyes. And now you've found it. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Joel had been wrestling with that question since reading Vaughan's final entries. The discovery could be important, genuinely important for medicine, for science, but bringing it to light meant risking exactly what Vaughan had feared: exploitation, habitat destruction, commercialization without conscience. "I need to verify it first," Joel said. "Find out if the plant really has the properties," Vaughan claimed. "If it's just wishful thinking, none of this matters. And if it's real?" Joel looked at the preserved specimen in its glass tube, the silver veins still visible after 40 years. "Then I need to make sure I do this right. That I protect what Vaughan died protecting." Hugh pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts. "I know someone, Dr. Corinne Plath, botanist at the university in Missoula. Good person, ethical. She might be willing to take a look, give you an honest assessment." Joel hesitated. Involving anyone else meant the secret would start spreading, the careful isolation Vaughan had built would begin to crack. But he couldn't verify Vaughan's claims alone. He needed expertise he didn't possess. "All right," he said finally. "Send her my contact information." Hugh made the call, spoke briefly, then handed Joel the phone. Dr. Plath's voice was professional but curious. Joel explained he'd found some old botanical research in the mountains, showed promise, wondered if she'd be willing to examine samples and documentation. "I'd need to see it to give you any real assessment," she said. "Can you send photographs?" Joel spent the next hour taking detailed photos of the journals, the specimens, Vaughan's sketches and notes. He sent them to Dr. Plath's email, then waited. The response came faster than he expected. "Mr. Kirby, I need to see these samples in person. I can be there tomorrow. If it's authentic, this could be remarkable." After they'd arranged details, Joel walked outside. The morning was clear and cold, frost glittering on every surface. The eagle sat in its usual tree, watching him with that unsettling focus. Joel approached slowly until he stood directly beneath it. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what was in that cave. You've been waiting all these years for someone to find it." The bird remained motionless, its golden eyes unblinking. "I don't understand why you chose me," Joel continued, his voice rough. "I'm nobody, just a divorced construction worker hiding in the woods. But I'll try to do right by this, by Vaughan, by whatever it is you're protecting." The eagle spread its wings, a span that seemed impossibly wide, then settled them again. Joel took it as acknowledgement, though he knew he was probably projecting meaning onto random bird behavior. Except it didn't feel random. Nothing about this felt random anymore. Dr. Corinne Plath arrived 3 days later in a university SUV, accompanied by 2 graduate students and enough equipment to stock a small laboratory. Joel watched from his porch as they parked, his stomach tight with anxiety. He'd grown accustomed to solitude. The sudden presence of people in his space felt like an invasion, even though he'd invited them. Dr. Plath was in her mid-40s, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her handshake firm and no nonsense. "Mr. Kirby, thank you for reaching out. I haven't been able to stop thinking about those photographs since you sent them." Her students introduced themselves: a young woman named Kerry and a quiet man named Philip, both doctoral candidates specializing in ethnobotany. They were polite, professional, and their presence made Joel's small cabin feel impossibly crowded. The eagle had vanished the moment the vehicles appeared. Joel felt its absence acutely, like losing a companion he hadn't realized he'd come to depend on. Dr. Plath examined the journals first, handling them with archival gloves, her expression growing more intense with each page she turned. "This is extraordinary work. Methodical, detailed, ahead of its time in many ways." Vaughan was documenting chemical analyses that most field botanists wouldn't have attempted in the 70s. She moved to the preserved specimens, studying them under a portable microscope she'd brought. The silver venation pattern particularly fascinated her. "I've never seen anything quite like this. The vascular structure is unusual, almost as if the plant has evolved a secondary system for nutrient transport." "Is it real?" Joel asked. "Could it actually have the properties Vaughan described?" The preliminary chemical signatures I'm seeing suggest compounds with potential bioactive properties, Dr. Plath said carefully. But I'd need to take samples back to the university for proper analysis, spectroscopy, chromatography, cellular assays. That's the only way to know for certain. Joel had expected this, but still felt reluctant. Once those samples left his cabin, once they entered the university system, the secret would truly be out. There'd be no taking it back. I want to see the cave first, Dr. Plath said. The original site. If we're going to do this properly, we need to understand the habitat, the growing conditions, everything Vaughn documented. Joel agreed, though the thought of leading these strangers to Vaughn's hidden sanctuary felt like a betrayal. Still, what choice did he have? The work needed verification, and he lacked the expertise to provide it. They set out the next morning, Joel leading the group along the route the eagle had shown him. The hike was harder for the academics, their breathing labored at elevation, frequent stops necessary. Joel found himself impatient, wanting to reach the cave, wanting this intrusion to be over so he could return to the quiet understanding he'd found with the eagle and Vaughn's legacy. When they finally reached the rocky outcropping, Dr. Plath stood at the cave entrance with something like reverence on her face. He built this, carved it out, made it functional. The dedication this represents. Inside, the team spread out with flashlights and cameras, documenting everything. Kerry found additional specimen containers Joel had missed on his first exploration, while Philip discovered cultivation notes tucked behind equipment, detailed instructions for growing the plant from seed, including soil composition requirements and precise temperature ranges. This is incredible, Doctor. Plath said, photographing pages. He wasn't just studying the plant in the wild, he was developing propagation protocols. If these seeds are viable... She stopped, picking up a sealed metal tin from the back of a shelf. Inside were dozens of small envelopes, each labeled with dates and location coordinates. Seeds, she breathed. Preserved seeds from different harvest years. If even a fraction of these are still viable after proper treatment, we could potentially cultivate the plant in controlled conditions. The excitement in her voice made Joel uneasy. He heard echoes of the pharmaceutical company's eagerness in Vaughn's journals, that same hunger for what the plant represented. What happens if you verify Vaughn's findings? Joel asked. If the plant really does what he thought? Dr. Plath looked up from the seeds. Then it could be revolutionary. Medical applications, certainly. Funding would pour in for research. There'd be publications, patents, possibly. Enormous scientific interest. She paused, seeming to read the concern on Joel's face. But we'd do it right. Ethical protocols, conservation first, sustainable practices. I promise you that. Joel wanted to believe her. She seemed sincere, principled, but Vaughn had probably thought the pharmaceutical company would operate ethically too, at least initially. They spent hours in the cave, cataloguing, photographing, carefully packing samples for transport. Joel overheard Kerry and Philip talking quietly about potential applications, about career implications, about how a discovery like this could define their early research careers. Their enthusiasm was understandable, but felt vulgar somehow, like strangers discussing how to divide an inheritance before the body was cold. By the time they hiked back to the cabin, dusk was falling, and Joel's head pounded with tension. The group loaded their vehicles with samples and documentation, Dr. Plath promising to keep Joel informed of all findings, to maintain his involvement throughout the verification process. "This is your discovery, Mr. Kirby," she said. "Well, Vaughn's discovery, but you're the one who brought it back to light. You'll be properly credited in any publications, and we'll consult with you on all decisions moving forward." After they left, Joel stood in his suddenly quiet cabin, feeling hollowed out. He'd done the right thing, he knew that intellectually. But emotionally, it felt like he'd given away something precious, something that wasn't his to give. His cell phone, which he'd kept charged but rarely checked, showed a notification, a missed call from yesterday, and a voicemail. Joel's heart lurched when he saw the name Iris. His hands shook as he pressed play. "Dad, it's me." Her voice was tentative, uncertain. I saw something online, an article in the Billings Gazette about a cave discovery in the mountains near where you're living. They mentioned your name. I wanted to make sure you're okay, that you're—" A long pause. "I miss you, Dad. I know things have been complicated, but I miss you. Can we talk? Please call me back." Joel played the message 3 times, hearing the emotion beneath her careful words. His daughter had reached out. After a year of silence, she'd seen his name in a news article and called. The discovery had inadvertently built a bridge across the gulf between them. He wanted to call back immediately, but it was past 10 o'clock, and he needed to know what to say, how to explain the past year without making excuses or sounding pathetic. He sat at his kitchen table, Vaughn's journals still spread before him, and started composing a text. "Iris, got your message." He stared at the words, then deleted them and started over. This happened 4 times before he finally sent something simple. "Hi, sweetheart. So good to hear your voice. Can we talk tomorrow? I miss you too. Love, Dad." The response came 10 minutes later. "Yes, call any time after 4. Love you." Joel read those 3 words, "love you," until his vision blurred. When had she last said that to him? Not in the final months before the divorce, not in the awful aftermath when lawyers had turned their family into negotiable assets. Those words felt like absolution he hadn't earned, but desperately needed. He walked outside, looking for the eagle, but the trees were empty. The bird had been gone since the university team arrived, and Joel wondered if it would return or if its work was finished now that others knew about the cave. The night was cold and crystalline, stars sharp overhead. Joel stood there until his fingers went numb, processing the day's complicated emotions. The discovery was no longer his alone. Iris had reached out. The quiet isolation he'd built around himself was crumbling, and he didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. Probably both, he decided. Definitely both. Joel called Iris the next evening at exactly 4 o'clock, his palms sweating despite the cold cabin air. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, and the sound of her voice, tentative but warm, made his chest ache. "Dad?" "Hi, sweetheart. Thank you for calling me, for reaching out." There was a pause, the kind that holds years of unsaid things. Then Iris said, "I've been wanting to for a while. I just didn't know how." Mum said. She stopped herself. "It doesn't matter what Mum said. I should have called sooner." They talked for an hour, awkward at first, both of them careful with their words. Iris told him about school, about applying to colleges, about her work at a coffee shop on weekends. Joel told her about the cabin, about Hugh, about the solitude that had seemed necessary but had maybe gone on too long. When she asked about the cave discovery, Joel found himself telling her everything. About the eagle, about Vaughn's journals, about the pharmaceutical company's threats 40 years ago, and the decision to hide research that might have changed medicine. Iris listened without interrupting, and Joel realized how much he'd missed this being a father, sharing things with his daughter, being part of her life. "That's kind of beautiful," Iris said when he finished. "Sad but beautiful." He gave up everything to protect something he believed mattered more than recognition. "He lost his family doing it," Joel said quietly. "His daughter was about your age when he disappeared from her life completely." The silence stretched between them, weighted with meaning. "You didn't disappear, Dad. You got quiet. But I always knew where you were." Her voice caught slightly. "I was angry for a long time. At you, at Mum, at everything that happened. But I'm starting to understand it's more complicated than whose fault it was." They talked about the divorce carefully, honestly, both acknowledging hurt without assigning blame. Claudia had her reasons. Joel had his failures. The marriage had died slowly over years of distance and resentment neither of them had known how to bridge. "I'd like to see you," Joel said. "If you're willing, maybe you could come up for a weekend? See where I'm living?" "I'd like that," Iris replied. "Actually, I was thinking maybe I could come up in a couple weeks. There's a break from classes." After they hung up, Joel sat in the gathering darkness, feeling something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, tangible hope that he might rebuild what he'd thought was permanently broken. The eagle returned that night, appearing at dawn like it had never left. Joel stood on his porch with coffee, watching it perch in its usual tree, and felt grateful for its presence in a way he couldn't fully articulate. 3 days later, Dr. Plath called with preliminary results. Her voice carried barely contained excitement. "Joel, the compounds in those samples, they're remarkable. We've isolated several alkaloids that show genuine bioactive properties. In cellular assays, we're seeing accelerated tissue repair, reduced inflammatory markers, possibly even enhanced cellular regeneration. This is early data, but it's consistent with everything Vaughan documented." Joel's grip tightened on the phone. So it's real. He wasn't imagining it. He absolutely wasn't. This plant represents a genuinely novel source of therapeutic compounds. The implications are... She paused. "We need to be very careful how we proceed. Word is already spreading through the scientific community. I've had inquiries from other universities, from private research firms, even from a pharmaceutical company, asking about access to samples." Joel's stomach dropped. What company? Dr. Plath gave him the name, and Joel searched it on his laptop. The pharmaceutical company that had threatened Vaughan in 1974 had been acquired by a larger corporation, which had itself been absorbed into a multinational conglomerate. But the division that handled natural product research still existed, still carried the same aggressive approach to acquisition. "I told them the samples aren't available for outside research yet, Doctor," Plath continued. "But they're persistent. They've offered substantial funding for access, and they've implied they have legal resources to pursue claims if we don't cooperate." "Claims? What kind of claims?" "They're suggesting Vaughan's research was conducted on federal land, making any discoveries public domain. It's a spurious argument, but they have lawyers who make careers out of spurious arguments." Joel felt cold. History was repeating itself. The same threat Vaughan had faced now aimed at his discovery. "What do we do?" "We need to make this public properly, with protections in place. File with the appropriate agencies, establish conservation protocols, maybe work with environmental groups to designate the habitat as protected. If we control the narrative, they can't simply take what they want." After the call ended, Joel sat with Vaughan's journals, rereading the botanist's final entries. The man had chosen to hide his work rather than risk its exploitation. But hiding hadn't solved anything. It had just delayed the problem 40 years. Joel returned to the cave alone the next day, needing to think, needing the quiet that only that hidden space provided. He'd brought a better flashlight and spent time exploring areas he'd rushed past during the university team's visit. In a narrow section near the back, he found scratches on the cave wall, marks that might have been random or might have been deliberate. He traced them with his fingers, feeling the grooves worn into stone. Some looked like tally marks. Others formed patterns he couldn't decipher. The eagle appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against daylight. It was the first time the bird had entered the cave with him since that initial discovery. It hopped inside, its talons clicking on stone, and moved to where Vaughan's old desk still stood. Joel approached slowly. The eagle tilted its head, watching him with those unsettling golden eyes, then looked down at the desk's surface. Joel followed its gaze and noticed a drawer he hadn't seen before, or rather, a space where a drawer should be, but appeared to be solid wood. He examined it more carefully and found a hidden catch. The drawer slid open to reveal a metal box, sealed and locked. Joel's heart raced as he worked the old lock with his knife until it finally gave way. Inside was a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, tied with string. Joel untied them carefully. They were addressed to Catherine Vaughan, Ansell's daughter, all dated from 1974. None had been sent. He opened the first one, dated March 1974. My dearest Katie, I know you're angry with me. Your mother says you won't even speak my name anymore. I've made mistakes, so many mistakes, putting my work ahead of my family, believing I could have both when the truth is I chose wrong again and again. I'm writing to explain, though I may never send these letters. You deserve to know why your father became a stranger. Joel read through several letters, each one a confession of regret, each one acknowledging the cost of Vaughan's obsession. The botanist had been trying to find words to bridge the gap with his daughter, explanations that might help her understand, if not forgive. The final letter was dated a week before Vaughan disappeared. Katie, the eagle has returned. I know that sounds mad, but there's an eagle that's been watching me for 3 years now, since I first found the plant. Some days I think it's judgment, a reminder of what I've sacrificed. Other days it feels like mercy, like nature itself is telling me I'm not alone in this. I hope someday you'll understand why I made the choices I made. I hope someday you'll forgive me. Your father loves you always. Dad. Joel set down the letter, his vision blurred. Vaughan had seen the eagle too, the same impossible bird watching over this place, guiding those it chose toward discovery or redemption, or something Joel didn't have words for. He looked up at the eagle, still perched on the desk. He wrote about you. You were with him too. The bird remained motionless, and Joel thought about the unsent letters, about a father who died before reconciling with his daughter, about patterns repeating across decades. Iris was coming in 2 weeks. Joel had a chance Vaughan never got a chance to choose differently, to put what mattered first. He carefully packed the letters with Vaughan's journals. Catherine deserved to know her father had thought of her, had regretted his absence. Joel would try to find her, would make sure she received what her father couldn't send. The university's formal proposal arrived by courier 5 days later. Joel sat at his kitchen table, reading through 43 pages of legal language and research protocols. The offer was substantial enough money to rebuild his life financially, pay off remaining debts from the divorce, maybe even help with Iris's college expenses. They wanted him as project consultant and public representative. His name would be on publications, his story would help secure additional grants and public support. Dr. Plath had included a personal note explaining that his involvement would lend authenticity and help frame the narrative around conservation rather than pure commercial exploitation. But there was a catch, buried in the technical language. The university wanted exclusive research rights, control over how and when information was released, and authority to license any commercial applications of discoveries derived from the plant. Standard practice for academic research, Dr. Plath's note assured him, but necessary to protect the integrity of the work. Joel set down the documents and walked outside. The eagle sat in its tree, and Joel found himself talking to it as he'd grown accustomed to doing. They're offering everything I need, financial security, purpose, a way forward. He paused. But Vaughan faced the same choice, didn't he? Someone offered him everything, and he knew it would cost more than money could measure. The bird offered no wisdom, only its steady presence. Hugh stopped by that afternoon, saw the proposal spread across the table, and read through it with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades navigating bureaucracy. They mean well, Hugh said finally. Dr. Plath especially, she's genuine. But institutions have their own momentum. Once you sign this, you're trusting them to keep promises when money and pressure start mounting. What would you do? Hugh smiled. I'm 73 years old and spent my life watching people make complicated choices in these mountains. Sometimes we're given a second act we didn't ask for. Question is whether we have the courage to play it different than the first. Joel sat with those words long after Hugh left. A second act. That's what this was, a chance to matter again, to have purpose beyond chopping wood and watching seasons change through a cabin window. But Vaughan's letters to Catherine haunted him. A man who'd chosen his work over his family, who died with regrets that filled pages and pages of unsent apologies. That evening, Joel took the proposal to the cave. It had become his place for thinking, for feeling connected to something larger than his own small life. The eagle followed him there, and Joel sat on the stone floor where Vaughan had once worked, surrounded by decades of dust and forgotten brilliance. He pulled out his flashlight and examined the cave walls more carefully. The scratch marks he'd noticed before he'd dismissed them as random, possibly from animals. But looking closer with Vaughan's story in mind, some seemed deliberately placed. Patterns that repeated, marks that formed crude shapes. One section showed what might have been birds, wings spread. Another appeared to be plants, simple sketches worn into stone. Joel traced them with his fingers, wondering if Vaughan had made these during long hours alone, or if they predated him entirely. Moving his light across the far wall, Joel noticed a narrow passage he'd missed before. It was partially hidden behind a stack of old supply crates. He shifted them carefully and squeezed through into a second chamber, smaller than the first. His flashlight beam swept across more of Vaughan's personal effects. A sleeping bag, old and deteriorated, a small camp stove, books, their pages swollen with moisture, and in the corner, a wooden box, similar to the one that had held the letters. Joel opened it with trembling hands. Inside were more letters, these addressed to whoever finds this. The top envelope was unsealed. Joel withdrew the pages and began to read by flashlight. "If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. I hope that brings you no satisfaction, though I imagine there are those who will be pleased to have this obstacle removed. My name is Ansel Vaughan, and I've spent 3 years hiding what may be the most important botanical discovery of this century. Not out of spite or madness, though many will say that's what drove me. I hid it because I learned what commercialization would cost. In the spring of 1973, a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Biosynth learned of my preliminary findings. They offered me everything: funding, facilities, recognition, but their plans required clear-cutting 17 acres of old-growth forest to establish harvest operations. They wanted to cultivate the plant industrially, extract and synthesize its compounds, patent the derivatives. The natural habitat would be destroyed within 5 years of starting operations. I refused. They threatened legal action, claimed my research on federal land made any discoveries public domain. Their lawyers made it clear they would take what they wanted, with or without my cooperation. So I chose to disappear, to let them think I'd died in these mountains, taking my knowledge with me. I've hidden everything: the detailed location data, the cultivation protocols, the chemical analyses that prove the plant's medicinal value. If someone finds this, I pray they're wiser than I was, braver than I was. The plant exists in a very limited range, perhaps only a few hundred acres of suitable habitat. Commercial exploitation would likely drive it to extinction within a generation. But the compounds it produces could genuinely help people, could reduce suffering. That's the weight I've carried, knowing I possess something valuable and choosing to hide it rather than risk its destruction. The eagle knows where the last seeds are buried. Follow it when the first snow comes. The coordinates are encoded in the scratch marks on the eastern wall. Anyone with patience can decipher them. But please, if you find them, protect what you discover. Don't let greed destroy what took millennia to evolve. If you're reading this, make better choices than I did. Find a way to use this knowledge without destroying its source. And if you have a family, don't make my mistakes. Don't sacrifice the people who love you for work that will outlive you by decades, but won't comfort you in your final moments. The eagle returns each morning. I've convinced myself it's a sign, though of what I can't say. Perhaps judgment, perhaps mercy, perhaps simply a reminder that I'm one small man in a vast wilderness, doing what I think is right, with no certainty of being right at all. Ansel Vaughan, the 14th of October, 1974. Joel read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. Vaughn had known exactly what he was doing, had deliberately hidden the most valuable information, had faked his death to protect what mattered. And now, 40 years later, Joel faced the same forces, the same choice. He pulled out his phone, though he had no service in the cave, and photographed the letter. Then he spent an hour examining the eastern wall, finding the scratch marks Vaughn had mentioned. They formed a pattern coordinates expressed as a simple substitution cipher, each mark representing a number or directional indicator. It took him 30 minutes to decode them, working by flashlight with paper and pencil. When he finished, he had exact GPS coordinates for a location about 2 miles northeast of the cave, at a slightly higher elevation. The last wild seeds, the final insurance policy Vaughn had hidden. Joel looked at the eagle, still perched near the chamber entrance. He trusted you to guard this. You've been here 40 years, waiting. Why? What are you? The bird tilted its head, and in the flashlight beam, its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that transcended simple animal awareness. Joel carefully resealed Vaughn's letter in its envelope and placed it back in the box. He had decisions to make, but they felt clearer now. Vaughn had shown him what happened when you chose wrong, when you let work consume everything until you died alone with only regrets for company. Joel had 2 weeks before Iris arrived, 2 weeks to figure out how to protect Vaughn's legacy without repeating his mistakes. 2 weeks to prove he'd learned something from the botanist's failures. He climbed back toward daylight, the eagle following, and felt the weight of choice settling on his shoulders. It was heavy, but it was his to carry. Joel spent 2 days researching the pharmaceutical company online, following corporate trails through acquisitions and mergers. The entity that had threatened Vaughn in 1974 was now a division of Apex Therapeutic Holdings, a multinational with annual revenues in the billions. Their natural products research division had a documented history of aggressive patent acquisition and what environmental groups politely called extraction-focused strategies. He was deep into a news article about their controversial harvesting operations in Madagascar when Hugh knocked on his door. "You've got a visitor," Hugh said, his expression troubled. "Well-dressed fellow showed up at my place asking about you. Said he was from some research company, wanted to discuss the cave discovery. I told him you were traveling, but he left this." Hugh handed Joel a business card, pristine white with embossed lettering. Dr. Vernon Cross, Director of Research Acquisition, Apex Therapeutic Holdings. Joel's blood ran cold. "They found me already." He was very polite, very professional, Hugh said, but there was something calculated about it. He asked specific questions about the plant samples, about what else you might have found, about whether you'd signed any exclusivity agreements yet. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing useful. But Joel, if they've sent someone here, they're not just casually interested. They're moving fast." That night, Joel couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Vaughn's letter, about pharmaceutical lawyers making threats, about history repeating itself in ways that felt inevitable and terrifying. At 3 in the morning, he made a decision. He drove to the cave at first light, hiked to the coordinates Vaughn had encoded. The location was a sheltered depression, protected by rock outcroppings and dense with vegetation. And there, growing in quiet abundance, were hundreds of the silver-veined plants, more than Vaughn had ever documented in his journals. A thriving colony that had survived in secret for decades. Joel photographed everything, documented the location, collected soil samples. If Apex was moving this fast, he needed leverage, needed evidence so widely distributed that no single entity could control it. When he returned to his cabin that afternoon, a rental car was parked in his driveway. A man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, examining the view with the air of someone assessing property value. "Mr. Kirby?" He turned with a practiced smile. "Vernon Cross. I hope I'm not intruding." "You are, actually." Cross's smile didn't waver. "I apologize. I tried reaching your neighbor, but he suggested I might find you here. I represent Apex Therapeutic Holdings. We've been following the news about your discovery with great interest. I'm sure you have. May I come in? I'd like to discuss a proposal that I think you'll find very attractive. Joel considered refusing, but curiosity won. He let Cross inside, watched the man's eyes sweep across the cabin, cataloguing the journals on the table, the specimen cases, the maps. Impressive work, Cross said. Vaughn was brilliant, truly ahead of his time. Such a tragedy that his research never received proper recognition. He didn't want recognition, he wanted protection. Cross's expression shifted subtly, the practiced warmth cooling. You've read his personal writings, then? The paranoid speculation about commercial interests threatening his work. It wasn't speculation. Your company or its predecessor made explicit threats. That was 40 years ago, Mr. Kirby. Different leadership, different era, different approaches to research partnerships. Cross sat down without being invited. We're prepared to offer you $20 million for complete access to Vaughn's research, the plant location, and any derivative discoveries. Full funding for your personal foundation, recognition in all publications, guaranteed conservation protocols. The number was staggering, more money than Joel could process, but the way Cross said it, casual, almost dismissive, suggested it was a negotiating position, not a ceiling. And if I refuse? Then we pursue other options. The research was conducted on federal land. We have legal precedent suggesting such discoveries fall under public access provisions. We have the resources to pursue that claim through appropriate channels. Cross's smile returned, sharper now. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. Much simpler to reach an agreement that benefits all parties. The way you reached an agreement with Vaughn, Dr. Vaughn, was mentally unstable, Mr. Kirby. His own journals document paranoid ideation, isolation, declining mental health. His claims about corporate threats were never substantiated. He disappeared into these mountains and likely died from exposure or accident, not conspiracy. Joel felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. I'd like you to leave now. Cross stood smoothly. Of course, but consider our offer carefully. The alternative is, we announce our legal claim publicly, file with federal agencies, initiate proceedings that will freeze all research until ownership is established. That could take years. During that time, the plant remains unstudied, its potential medical applications unrealized, people who might benefit from treatment left waiting. He paused at the door. We're not the villains here, Mr. Kirby. We want the same thing you do to see Vaughn's work fulfill its potential. We just have the resources to do it properly. After Cross left, Joel sat in silence, his hands shaking with anger. The threat was clear: cooperate or watch them bury the discovery in legal action that would accomplish exactly what Vaughn had feared: delay and obstruction until they found a way to take what they wanted. He called Dr. Plath immediately. They've already contacted me, she said. Apex filed a formal inquiry with the university this morning, claiming prior research rights based on preliminary contact with Vaughn in the 70s. It's a reach legally, but they have documentation showing Vaughn was in communication with their predecessor company. What do? We go public, completely public, file with environmental agencies, contact conservation groups, release findings to media outlets. Make it impossible for them to control the narrative or claim exclusive access. Won't that just expose the location, make the habitat more vulnerable? It's already vulnerable. Joel. They're going to find it with or without our cooperation. At least, if we control how it's announced, we can build protections first. Joel knew she was right, but it meant abandoning the secrecy Vaughn had died maintaining. It meant trusting that public exposure would protect rather than destroy. That evening, the Eagle returned, landing on Joel's porch railing closer than it had ever been. Joel stood on the other side of the glass door, watching the bird watch him. "Vaughn wrote about you," Joel said, in his final letter. "He said you'd been with him for 3 years, watching, waiting. That was 40 years ago." He pressed his hand against the glass. "Eagles don't live 40 years. It's not possible. But Hugh says he's seen you in photographs from Vaughn's time. Same markings. So what are you? Why are you still here?" The eagle spread its wings, a span that seemed to fill the porch, then settled them again. Its golden eyes held Joel's gaze with an intensity that felt almost human. "He wrote that you know where the last seeds are," Joel continued. "I found them. I decoded his message and found the colony. Hundreds of plants, thriving, protected by nothing but luck and remoteness. But that's not enough anymore, is it? They're coming, just like they came for Vaughn. And this time, I have to make different choices." The bird remained motionless, and Joel felt tears building. For Vaughn, who died alone with his regrets. For himself, facing decisions that felt impossible. For Iris, who deserved a father who chose differently than both Joel and Vaughn had chosen before. "I'm going to protect it," Joel said. "Whatever it costs, I'm going to make sure Vaughn's sacrifice meant something. But I'm not going to die alone in these mountains with letters I never sent. I'm going to do this differently." The eagle turned its head, looking toward the mountains where the colony grew in secret. Then it looked back at Joel, and in that moment, Joel understood. The bird wasn't judgment or mercy. It was witness. It had watched Vaughn make his choices and live with their consequences. Now it was watching Joel face his own moment of decision. The question was whether Joel had learned anything from what he'd witnessed. Joel didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table. Vaughn's journals and letters spread before him, making lists, weighing options, trying to find a path forward that wouldn't end in the same isolation and regret that had consumed the botanist. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He called Dr. Plath first. "I want to go public, but on specific terms. We announce the discovery with full conservation protocols already in place. We contact environmental groups, federal agencies, media outlets, everyone simultaneously so no single entity can control the narrative. And we do it before Apex can file their legal claims." "That's aggressive, Doctor," Plath said. "We'd need to move very fast. Coordinate multiple organizations, prepare documentation, establish protections. We're talking days, not weeks." "Then we have days. Can you handle the scientific and academic side?" "Yes. I'll contact the Forestry Service, start the process for emergency habitat protection. But Joel, this will make you the public face of this story. There will be media attention, scrutiny, pressure. Are you prepared for that?" Joel thought about the 8 months he'd spent hiding in this cabin, avoiding the world, letting his life contract to the space between these walls. Then he thought about Iris, who'd reached out despite his withdrawal, who was willing to give him another chance. "I'm prepared," he said. The next call was harder. He dialed Iris's number, his heart hammering. "Dad? Is everything okay? I need to tell you something, and I need your help." He explained everything. The pharmaceutical company's threats, Vaughn's hidden letter, the decision to go public before Apex could seize control. Iris listened quietly, and when he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "You're really doing this," she said finally, standing up to them. "I have to. If I don't, Vaughn's sacrifice meant nothing. And Joel's voice caught. "I need to prove I can make different choices than I've made before, that I can fight for something that matters." "I can help," Iris said. "Dad, this is exactly the kind of story that needs to go viral. Social media, conservation hashtags, real-time updates. If we do this right, we can build public support so fast that Apex won't be able to move against it without massive backlash." "You'd do that? Take time from school to help with this? Are you kidding? This is important. And," her voice softened, "it means being there for you. I want to be there for you." Joel closed his eyes against sudden tears. "When can you come?" "I'm leaving Denver in an hour. I'll be there by tonight." After they hung up, Joel sat with the weight of gratitude and terror in equal measure. His daughter was coming. He was about to step into public attention he'd spent months avoiding. Everything was about to change. Hugh arrived an hour later with supplies and advice. "You sure about this? Once you light this fire, there's no putting it out." Vaughn spent 40 years in the shadows, protecting something at the cost of everything else. "I won't make that same choice." Hugh smiled. "Good. Then let's make sure you do it right." They spent the day preparing. Joel organized all documentation, photographs, journal entries, chemical analyses, location data. Dr. Plath coordinated with the Forestry Service for emergency protective designation. Environmental groups were contacted and briefed. Media outlets received carefully crafted press releases scheduled for simultaneous distribution. Iris arrived at 7 that evening, and when Joel saw her get out of her car, something in his chest cracked open. She'd grown up in the year since he'd last seen her, taller, older, carrying herself with a confidence he didn't remember. When she hugged him, he held on maybe too long, breathing in the reality of her presence. "Show me everything," she said. They spent hours at the kitchen table, Iris reading through Vaughn's journals, examining photographs, understanding the full scope of what her father had discovered. She asked sharp questions, made connections Joel had missed, and treated the work with a respect that reminded him why he'd loved being her father. "This is incredible, Dad. Not just the plant, the whole story. A man who sacrificed everything to protect something he believed mattered. And 40 years later, his daughter's age, you find it and have the chance to do what he couldn't." She looked up at him. "You get to finish his story differently." "That's what I'm hoping." "Then let's get started." Iris opened her laptop and began crafting social media posts, carefully worded threads that told Vaughn's story, explained the discovery's significance, highlighted the conservation imperative, and documented the pharmaceutical threat. She created hashtags, tagged relevant accounts, prepared image galleries. "We don't post until tomorrow morning," she said, coordinated with Dr. Plath's announcements. "But once we start, I'll maintain a real-time thread. Every update, every development, everything documented publicly where they can't hide or spin it." Joel watched his daughter work, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind strategic and sharp. When had she become this person? How had he missed seeing her grow into someone so capable? "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Iris looked up. "For what?" "For disappearing. For letting the divorce turn me into someone who couldn't be there for you. For choosing to hide instead of fight." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad, you didn't make wrong choices. You just stopped making any choices at all. But you're making them now. That's what matters." They talked late into the night, really talked, the kind of conversation they hadn't had in years. About the divorce, about Claudia's bitterness and Joel's withdrawal, about the year of silence and hurt feelings. Iris shared her own pain, the ways she'd felt abandoned, the anger that had eventually softened into understanding. "I blamed you for a long time," she admitted. "It was easier than accepting that sometimes things just fall apart. But I'm starting to see it wasn't about fault. You and Mum you stopped being able to reach each other. And neither of you knew how to fix it. I should have tried harder. Should have put you first. You're putting me first now. You're letting me be part of this, letting me help. That means everything." Joel squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words. They slept a few hours, then woke before dawn. Dr. Plath called at 6 with confirmation the Forestry Service had issued emergency protective designation for the habitat area. Environmental groups had statements ready. Media outlets were primed. At 7 o'clock, Mountain Time, everything went live simultaneously. Dr. Plath's university press release detailed the discovery's scientific significance. Federal agencies announced habitat protection. Conservation groups issued statements supporting preservation. And Iris began her social media thread, posting photographs, Excerpts from Vaughan's journals, Joel's story of following the eagle. Within an hour, the story was spreading. Within 2 hours, it was trending. News outlets picked it up, shared it, amplified it. The narrative was taking shape exactly as they'd hoped, not about commercial opportunity, but about conservation, about a man who'd sacrificed recognition to protect something precious, about the importance of preserving rare habitats. Joel's phone rang constantly with media requests. He ignored most, but did a few carefully selected interviews, keeping his message simple. Vaughan's work deserved recognition, the plant deserved protection, and commercial interests needed to respect conservation over profit. By noon, Iris's thread had 50,000 shares. By mid-afternoon, environmental organizations were organizing petition drives. The public response was overwhelming. People loved the story, loved the mystery of the eagle, loved the idea of protecting something rare against corporate greed. And through it all, the eagle sat in its tree outside Joel's cabin, watching witness to everything unfolding. Joel stood on his porch with Iris beside him, looking at the bird that had started all of this. "It knew," Iris said softly. "Somehow it knew you'd do this differently." Joel nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. The eagle had chosen him for reasons he might never understand, but he was determined to prove worthy of that choice. By the third day, the story had gone national. Major news networks covered it, environmental podcasts discussed it, and social media was flooded with support for protecting Vaughan's discovery. Iris managed the online narrative with skill Joel found remarkable, responding to comments, sharing updates, keeping the momentum building. Then the pushback started. Apex Therapeutic Holdings issued a statement claiming they'd been in partnership discussions with Vaughan in 1974 and had documentation proving prior research claims. They positioned themselves as champions of medical advancement, arguing that emotional appeals shouldn't prevent potentially life-saving research from moving forward. Their PR team was sophisticated, their messaging carefully crafted. They posted sympathetic stories about patients who might benefit from treatments derived from the plant. They emphasized their conservation credentials, their sustainable research practices, their commitment to ethical science. Joel watched the narrative shift in real time, felt the public opinion beginning to fracture. Some still supported pure conservation, others argued that medicine mattered more than sentiment. The comment sections turned into battlegrounds. "They're good at this," Iris said, reading through Apex's latest press release. "They know how to make themselves look reasonable." Dr. Plath called with troubling news. Apex has filed formal claims with multiple agencies. They're arguing that Vaughan's preliminary agreements with their predecessor company constitute prior research rights. It's legally questionable, but they have expensive lawyers making the case. Can they actually win? Maybe. Probably not. But they can tie things up in litigation for years. And during that time, they'll keep pushing for access, keep building their case in the court of public opinion. Joel felt the familiar weight of helplessness settling on his shoulders. They'd done everything right, but corporate resources were overwhelming their grassroots efforts. That afternoon, Iris discovered something on a photography forum. Someone had posted game camera images from the forest near the cave, time-stamped from 2 weeks earlier, before Joel had gone public. The photos showed men in professional gear, surveying equipment, maps spread across portable tables. "Dad, they've been scouting the area. They probably have a good idea where the habitat is." Joel enlarged the images on his laptop. The men wore clothing with no visible logos, but one photo showed a vehicle partially visible in the background. He enhanced it as much as his basic software allowed and made out a corporate tag on the windshield. He called Dr. Plath. "They've already been to the site. They know where it is. Then we need to get there first. Document everything before they can claim they discovered it independently." Joel and Iris packed hiking gear, cameras, GPS equipment. Hugh insisted on coming as protection and witness. They set out at dawn, moving fast along the route Joel now knew by heart. The eagle appeared as they entered the forest, circling overhead, leading them forward. Iris watched it with wonder. It's really doing it. Like it's guiding us. It's been guiding me since September, Joel said. I've stopped questioning why. The hike took 3 hours. When they reached the coordinates Vaughn had encoded, Joel's heart sank. Fresh footprints marked the area, multiple people, recent, probably within the last 24 hours. Someone had been here. The plant colony was undisturbed, hundreds of silver-veined specimens growing in their sheltered depression. But markers had been placed, small orange flags on thin wire stakes, the kind surveyors used to mark boundaries or sampling locations. They've already claimed it, Hugh said quietly. Those are property markers. Joel pulled out his phone, photographing everything. The plants, the markers, the footprints. Iris did the same, documenting from multiple angles, recording GPS coordinates, creating a time-stamped record. They were halfway through their documentation when they heard it, the distant sound of a helicopter. We need to move, Hugh said. Now, but Joel shook his head. No. We stand our ground. This is federal land, protected habitat. They can't force us to leave. The helicopter grew louder, appearing over the ridge. It circled the depression twice, clearly surveying them, then moved to land in a clearing about 100 yards away. Joel's pulse hammered in his ears. 3 people emerged and began hiking toward them. 2 wore outdoor gear suitable for fieldwork. The third was Vernon Cross, somehow managing to look professional even in hiking boots and a technical jacket. "Mr. Kirby," Cross called as they approached. "What a coincidence finding you here." "This is protected federal habitat," Joel said. "You're trespassing." "Actually, we have permits for biological survey work in this area, filed 3 weeks ago, approved yesterday." Cross smiled. "All perfectly legal. The question is whether you have authorization to be here." Joel's mind raced. 3 weeks ago was before he'd gone public, possibly even before he'd found the cave. They'd been planning this, moving pieces into position while he'd been reading journals and following eagles. "These markers are illegal," Joel said, pointing to the orange flags. "This habitat is under emergency protective designation. Preliminary designation pending review. Our legal team is contesting it through appropriate channels. Until final determination, we have every right to conduct approved survey work." Cross's expression remained pleasant, reasonable. "We don't need to be adversaries here, Mr. Kirby. There's room for multiple parties to study this plant responsibly. The way you studied it responsibly in Madagascar, in Indonesia. Your company has a documented history of extractive research that destroys the very resources you claim to protect." One of Cross's companions, a woman in her 30s with field equipment hanging from her vest, spoke up. "That's not fair. We've changed our protocols significantly. Current practices prioritize sustainability and habitat preservation." "How convenient," Iris said sharply. "After decades of destruction, you've suddenly found ethics right when public attention is focused here." Cross's smile thinned. "You're Dr. Kirby's daughter, I presume, the social media manager who's been running quite an effective campaign against us." "Iris," Joel said quietly, a warning, but his daughter stepped forward. "I'm someone who's watched companies like yours wrap exploitation in the language of progress. You're not here for medicine. You're here for patents and profit. And you're here for what exactly? Sentimentality? Emotion over science?" Cross's reasonableness was cracking. "We have the resources to properly study this plant, to develop it into treatments that could help millions. You have a feel-good story and a bird." The eagle, as if summoned by mention, appeared overhead. It circled the depression once, then dove at the helicopter in the clearing, its cry sharp and aggressive. Cross's team turned to watch. Startled. "Your bird seems upset," Cross said dryly. Joel looked at the eagle, at his daughter standing beside him, at Hugh watching everything with the calm of someone who'd seen enough years to recognize what mattered. Then he looked at Cross and his team, at the markers they'd planted, at the helicopter representing resources he couldn't match. "We're not leaving," Joel said. "This habitat is protected, and we're staying to ensure it remains undisturbed until proper protocols are established." "Then you'll be here for quite some time," Cross replied. "We have legal claims moving forward, and we'll continue our authorized survey work regardless of your presence." He paused. "But I should warn you, staying here won't change anything. We've already collected samples. We have what we need." Joel felt cold wash through him. They'd been here before, had taken specimens before placing their markers. The habitat might be protected, but the genetic material was already in their possession. Cross saw the realization on Joel's face and smiled. "All perfectly legal, conducted under appropriate permits. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." Joel watched Cross's team begin setting up equipment, his mind racing through options. They had samples, legal permits, resources he couldn't match. Everything Vaughn had feared was happening in real time, wrapped in legitimate procedures and professional language. "Dad," Iris said quietly, "we need to document this. Everything. Right now." She was already filming on her phone, narrating what they were witnessing. "We're at the protected habitat site, and Apex Therapeutic Holdings has arrived with what they claim are survey permits filed 3 weeks ago. They've admitted to already collecting plant samples." Joel understood immediately. They couldn't stop Apex physically, but they could control the narrative, show the world what was happening in real time. "Get the permits," Joel told Cross. "Show us the documentation that authorizes you to collect from protected habitat." Cross hesitated, and in that hesitation, Joel saw uncertainty. "Our paperwork is with the helicopter pilot." "Then get it, because my daughter is live streaming this conversation right now, and thousands of people are watching you claim legal authority you might not actually have." Cross's professional mask slipped. He pulled out his phone, checking something, his jaw tightening. "You're bluffing." "Check her follower count," Joel said. "Check the hashtags. This story has been trending for 3 days. You really think people aren't watching?" Iris held up her phone, showing the live view counterclimbing. 4,000 viewers right now. Looks like the algorithm is pushing it out. People are very interested in what happens to protected wilderness areas." One of Cross's team members leaned in, speaking quietly. Cross's expression darkened. He stepped away, phone to his ear, having a terse conversation Joel couldn't hear. Hugh moved closer to Joel. "Smart girl you've got there. She gets it from her mother," Joel said, though his chest swelled with pride. Minutes passed. The live stream viewer count kept climbing. Iris narrated calmly, explaining Vaughn's story, the habitat's significance, the question of whether proper procedures had been followed. Comments flooded in, supportive, angry, demanding answers. Cross ended his call and approached Joel with visible frustration. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "I'm making it transparent." "There's a difference. Our permits are valid. We followed proper channels." "Then show them. On camera. Let everyone see that you did this properly." Cross's team member, the woman who'd spoken earlier, approached with a tablet. "Vernon, we should just show them. Our paperwork is solid." Cross took the tablet reluctantly and held it up. Iris zoomed in with her phone, capturing the permit details. It showed authorization for biological survey work in the general area, dated 3 weeks prior, as Cross had claimed. But Joel noticed something. The specific coordinates listed didn't match this location. They were close but not exact. "These coordinates are wrong," Joel said. "This permit authorizes survey work 1/2 mile south of here." Cross's jaw tightened. "Coordinates can have slight variations depending on—" "1/2 mile isn't a slight variation," Hugh interrupted. "That's a deliberate difference. You're outside your permitted area." The live stream comments exploded. Iris kept filming, her hands steady, her voice calm as she narrated what Joel had discovered. Cross's team exchanged glances. The woman stepped back, speaking into her radio. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled back, audible in the quiet forest. "Base is advising immediate withdrawal," she said to Cross. "Legal says the permit discrepancy could expose us to trespass claims." Cross looked at Joel with pure fury. "This isn't over." "I know," Joel said. "But today, you're leaving." The team packed their equipment quickly, professionally. Cross paused before following them. "You've won a day, maybe a week, but we have resources you can't imagine. We'll find legal channels, proper permits, appropriate authorization, and when we do, no amount of social media theater will stop us." "Maybe not," Joel replied. "But every step you take will be documented, every procedure questioned, every decision scrutinized. You wanted to do this quietly, take what you wanted without oversight. That's not happening anymore." Cross walked away without responding. The helicopter lifted off minutes later, its noise fading as it disappeared beyond the ridge. Joel stood in the sudden quiet, his legs shaking with adrenaline crash. Iris ended the live stream, and they watched the view count settle at over 15,000. "Dad, that was incredible," Iris said, her voice tight with emotion. "You stood up to them." "We stood up to them," Joel corrected. "I wouldn't have known what to do without you." Hugh clapped Joel's shoulder. "Vaughn would be proud. You protected his discovery, but you didn't do it alone. You didn't sacrifice what matters." The eagle landed nearby, closer than it had ever come. Joel approached slowly, carefully, until he stood within arm's reach of the massive bird. It watched him with those golden eyes that held impossible depth. "Thank you," Joel whispered, "for bringing me here, for giving me something worth fighting for." He reached out slowly, and the bird didn't move away. His fingers touched the feathers on its back, soft, warm, undeniably real. For a moment that felt suspended outside normal time, man and eagle existed in perfect understanding. Then the bird spread its wings and launched itself into the air, circling the depression once before, flying north, away from the cabin, away from the areas Joel knew. "Where's it going?" Iris asked. Joel watched until the eagle disappeared from sight. "I don't know. Maybe its work here is finished." They spent another hour documenting the habitat properly, photographing every plant, recording detailed observations. When they finally hiked back toward the cabin, Joel felt different, lighter somehow, despite the certainty that Apex would return with proper procedures and renewed determination. He'd done what Vaughn couldn't, protected the discovery without sacrificing connection, without dying alone with unsent letters and unspoken regrets. He'd made different choices, and those choices had brought his daughter back into his life, had given him purpose that extended beyond isolation. The evening news was already running the story when they reached Hugh's cabin to use his television. The live stream had been picked up by major outlets. Environmental groups were demanding investigation into Apex's permit procedures. Federal agencies were reviewing authorization processes. "You've started something," Hugh said, handing Joel a beer. "Can't predict where it ends, but you've definitely started it." Joel sat beside Iris on Hugh's worn couch, his arm around his daughter's shoulders, and watched reporters discuss the story he'd lived. It felt surreal and right in equal measure. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Plath. "The university is backing full conservation protocols. No commercial access until comprehensive environmental impact studies are complete. Could take years." "You did it, Joel." He showed the message to Iris, who grinned and hugged him. "We did it, Dad." Together. Outside, the mountains were painted gold by sunset. Somewhere in that wilderness, the eagle flew toward destinations unknown, its purpose fulfilled, or perhaps simply paused. Joel would never know for certain, but he knew this. He'd been given a second chance, and he'd chosen differently than the first time. That had to be enough. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with Apex. The winter snows had come to the mountains, transforming the forest into something quiet and pristine. Joel stood at his cabin window watching dawn break over the white-covered peaks, coffee warming his hands, and felt something he'd almost forgotten: contentment. The valley where Vaughan's plants grew was now officially designated the Vaughan Kirby Botanical Preserve, protected under federal conservation law. The university's research continued under strict protocols, prioritizing habitat protection over commercial exploitation. Dr. Plath sent regular updates. Early medical trials showed genuine promise, but proper studies would take years, perhaps decades. The work would outlive them all. Apex had withdrawn their legal claims after the permit scandal triggered federal investigations into their authorization processes. They'd issued a statement about respecting conservation priorities, though Joel suspected it was more about avoiding regulatory scrutiny than genuine principle. Either way, the threat had receded. Joel had accepted a modest consulting position, with the preserve enough involvement to honor Vaughan's legacy without consuming his life. He led occasional educational hikes, telling Vaughan's story to researchers and students, ensuring the botanist's sacrifice was remembered and understood. But the real change was smaller, more personal. Iris visited twice a month now, sometimes more. Their relationship had healed in ways Joel hadn't dared hope for during those dark months of isolation. They talked regularly, easily, about real things. She'd decided on environmental studies for college, inspired by the discovery and her role in protecting it. "You gave me something to care about," she'd told him last visit. "Showed me that one person can make a difference if they're willing to stand up." Hugh had officially retired, though he spent most days at the preserve anyway, managing visitors and telling stories about the old days when Vaughan had worked these mountains. He and Joel had dinner together weekly, a ritual of companionship that neither acknowledged but both depended on. This morning, Joel was preparing for something important. Iris was arriving with a guest, a woman named Catherine Brennan, who'd been Catherine Vaughan 40 years ago. Joel had found her through careful research, reached out with hesitation, unsure if she'd want to revisit her father's memory. She'd responded immediately. "I always wondered what happened to him, always hoped he'd thought of me at the end." Now she was driving up from Salt Lake City with Iris, coming to see what her father had protected, to receive the letters he'd never sent. They arrived mid-morning. Catherine was in her 50s, her father's intensity visible in her eyes. She embraced Joel on the porch like he was family. "Thank you," she said, "for finding his work, for protecting it, for," her voice caught, "for making sure he mattered." Joel gave her the letters, watched her read them with tears streaming down her face. Iris sat beside her, offering quiet support. When Catherine finished, she looked up at Joel with gratitude and grief mixed together. "He thought of me. All those years he carried this regret." "He did," Joel said gently, "but he also believed what he was protecting mattered." Both things were true for him. They hiked to the cave together, Catherine wanting to see where her father had worked. She touched his equipment, his journals, stood in the space he'd carved from stone and wilderness. "He was brilliant and flawed and human," she said. "I spent so many years angry at him for choosing his work over us. But reading these letters, I understand now it wasn't that simple. He was trying to protect something he believed was more important than personal happiness." "Do you think he was right?" Iris asked. Catherine considered this. "I think he did what he thought was right, and it cost him everything. Whether that was worth it." She paused. "I'm not the one to judge, but I'm grateful someone finished his story differently. Someone who didn't let the work consume everything else." They visited the preserve, Catherine seeing the plants her father had dedicated his life to protecting. A bronze plaque had been installed at the entrance. "Vaughan Kirby Preserve, protected by courage, discovered by grace." Catherine touched the plaque, tracing her father's name. "He'd be proud of this, proud of you." That evening, they gathered at Joel's cabin. Joel, Iris, Catherine, Hugh. They shared stories and memories, connected by Vaughan's legacy and the choices that had brought them together. Catherine talked about her father's early years before obsession claimed him. Joel talked about the eagle, about following instinct into wilderness and finding purpose he hadn't known he needed. "Do you ever see it anymore?" Catherine asked. "The eagle?" Joel shook his head. "Not since the day we confronted Apex. It flew north and didn't come back." "Maybe its work was finished," Hugh said. "Maybe you were what it was waiting for all along, someone who'd protect what needed protecting without losing what mattered most." After Catherine and Iris left the next morning, already planning future visits, already becoming something like family, Joel hiked alone into the forest. The snow was deep, the silence profound. He made his way to the preserve, to the place where hundreds of plants slept beneath winter's blanket, waiting for spring. He stood there a long time, thinking about Vaughn and choices and second chances. His phone buzzed a text from Iris with a simple heart emoji. Joel smiled and sent one back. As he turned to leave, movement caught his eye. High above, circling in the clear winter sky, a golden eagle soared. It might have been his eagle. It might have been another. At this distance, Joel couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. He'd learned what he needed to learn. He'd found what he needed to find. The eagle had given him a gift, not the discovery itself, but the courage to face his life again, to make different choices, to understand that protecting what mattered meant more than grand gestures or noble sacrifices. It meant showing up, being present, choosing connection over isolation. Joel raised his hand in greeting or farewell or gratitude. He wasn't sure which. The eagle circled once more, then flew toward the distant peaks, its wings catching the sun. He walked back through the snow-covered forest, back toward his cabin, where warmth and purpose waited. His phone rang. Iris, calling just to talk, to tell him about her day, to share the small moments that made up a life. Joel answered, his voice warm. "Hey, sweetheart, tell me everything." The mountains rose around him, patient and eternal. The preserve was protected. Vaughn's legacy lived on. And Joel Kirby, 50 years old and finally finding his way back to himself, walked home through the wilderness that had saved him, listening to his daughter's voice and knowing, with the kind of certainty that settles deep in the bones, that he'd made the right choice. Life, simple and real and precious, continued.